The object entered the Empire's outer surveillance grid at 0300 local orbital time, moving faster than any recorded body that wasn't a comet or a warhead, yet it burned no trail, emitted no radiation, and deflected the ping of every sensor. Its signature was a subtraction, a negative in the data stream, an absence that screamed. Within minutes, the Imperial Defense Array reoriented its orbital mirrors, and for the first time in 30 years, the early warning lattice declared a condition black. There was no ID, no signal, no origin. The Empire had identified an object moving too fast. Commander Lyra Dens watched the feed in silence from the command spire's upper pit. Surrounded by the soft hum of the Empire's most advanced systems, each useless against something they couldn't define. 1,000 data threads shimmered above the tactical table. Velocity plots, sensor echoes, probability cones. The projections were incoherent, like a weaponized glitch. She'd spent her life studying patterns, but this was something that existed between them. Every analyst on shift had already sworn the data was real. There were no ghosts left in the Empire's surveillance lattice. Not since the AI uprisings. The feed cut into thermal visual overlays as the object breached orbital layers. For an instant it lit the upper atmosphere, not as flame but as distortion. A rippling of sky as if the world's curvature flexed. Then it disappeared from every channel except one. A decaying electromagnetic pulse that registered on deep band frequencies. It was neither coded nor random, it was intent. Lyra ordered a full blacknet containment, shutting down comms across 5 sectors. Nothing in or out until they had eyes on what had entered their airspace. On the surface, under the horizon of the capital arcology, a forward air-ground detachment was already scrambling. Captain Eno Ravel, ex-frontliner turned interceptor pilot, received the call while inside his ship's maintenance cradle. The hangar's walls trembled as auxiliary thrusters spun up. The deck crew was silent. They'd trained for intrusions, but this wasn't protocol. His targeting AI showed nothing. No visual, no IFF, no friend or foe markers. Just coordinates and velocity. Pointless when the target could be anywhere between space and sea in the next 5 minutes. He sealed his helmet and spoke once, a ritual to no one but himself. Stay alive long enough to understand what you're fighting. Eno's fighter. A narrow fuselage with variable geometry wings and dual reaction drives. Launched from the cradle on magnetic rails. Acceleration pressed him into the harness until breath became math. The city shrank behind him, its curved wall of glass and steel glowing with dawn's first scatter. The sky above was thin, streaked with cold vapor trails from defense drones ascending in formation. His HUD showed layered radar sweeps, each a mesh of blue arcs. They were searching blind. The unknown object's last trajectory vector sliced obliquely across the continent, heading toward the northern waste, a region of abandoned test ranges and decommissioned reactors. The Empire's northern waste was a scar from the fusion wars. Nothing lived there except dust storms and obsolete drones scavenging their own wrecks. Eno switched to passive sensors to avoid giving away his position. Static bled across his optics. Something out there was warping the electromagnetic floor itself. His engines stuttered. He cut power, glided on inertia, and drifted above a dead plain of salt and rusted towers. Then his proximity alarms whispered a tone that made no sense. Range 0. He looked up. For a fraction of a second, a shape passed overhead, blotting out the stars. It was silent, smooth, and impossibly fast. His onboard systems lagged, registering a massive kinetic shadow moving at sub-light deceleration speeds. He had never seen anything like it, not even in simulations. He triggered his recorder, but the feed returned only distortion. A tunnel of light bending inward, as if the camera had filmed gravity itself. Then the shockwave hit. His fighter rolled uncontrolled, gyro systems screaming. He barely stabilized before impact with the ground, scraping along the plane in a storm of metal and dust. When the dust settled, there was no sign of the object. But the ground where it had passed was glassed into a perfect arc, as though something had skimmed the surface at near orbital speed and melted it without heat. The Empire's satellites registered the same curvature cutting across 100 kilometers of terrain, a precise line, drawn by an invisible hand. Back in the command spire, Lyra ordered an immediate recovery team to the site. She dispatched a science detachment under Dr. Senka Reese, the Empire's lead xenophysics analyst. Known for her habit of treating war zones as laboratories, Senka had no love for the military hierarchy, but loved mysteries even less. She arrived on site with a convoy of mobile labs, drones circling above like carrion birds. The first scans of the glass terrain showed something embedded beneath, not deep, 10 meters under the crust. Composition unknown. Magnetic flux interfering with all readings. Senka instructed the excavation team to proceed manually. No plasma cutters. The energy feedback might trigger a detonation. They worked through the night under shifting auroras. The excavation lights reflected off something that wasn't metal, wasn't stone. It was a smooth surface shaped like a tear, seamless and dark as empty space. Around it the ground pulsed faintly, rhythmically, like a heartbeat beneath glass. Senka crouched close enough to see her reflection distort across the surface. It wasn't a craft. It was something smaller. A probe maybe, or a seed. Lyra watched the transmission remotely, her pulse matching the flicker of the readouts. She'd seen weapons masquerade as art before, but nothing this quiet. She ordered the perimeter sealed and initiated blackout level 1. No signal beyond the chain of command. Even the Emperor would learn after she had an answer. Senka's team encased the object in a containment shell of null field plating and began transport to the deep vault, a facility buried beneath the polar ice shelf, shielded from every known spectrum. Only the most classified projects went there, and most never came out. Eno awoke in a medical capsule 2 days later with a fractured collarbone and a warning citation for reckless maneuvering. He ignored both. The footage from his fighter was being scrubbed by intelligence, but a fragment remained in his neural implant. An afterimage burned into memory. He replayed it again and again. The curve of light, the silence before impact, the faint outline of something moving within the distortion. It hadn't been debris. It had looked back. He reported to Lyra despite orders to stand down. She listened without expression, only tightening her grip on the edge of the table when he described the sense of being scanned, not by radar but by thought. In the deep vault, Senka oversaw the first phase of analysis. The containment shell registered pressure differentials from within, as though the object were breathing in microcycles. Every instrument failed to penetrate the surface. Even particle mapping returned null vectors. She ordered a resonance pulse using subsonic frequencies, an experimental technique meant to map structure by harmonics. The moment the pulse hit, the object responded. Its surface rippled once, and then the entire facility's power grid flickered. Systems rebooted into a foreign diagnostic mode no one had coded. Text scrolled across every screen simultaneously. No ID, no signal, no origin. The words repeated in multiple languages, then collapsed into a cascade of symbols. Senka's heart hammered as she realized it was using their own network as a medium to communicate. She isolated the system, severing external links. The message ended as abruptly as it had begun, leaving only a residual hum vibrating through the floor. Whatever it was, it had noticed them. The Empire's high command convened an emergency council. Lyra was summoned to present her report. Around the obsidian table sat admirals, ministers, and the Emperor's proxy AI, a spectral form rendered in light. They debated interception protocols, first contact contingencies, potential biohazard quarantines. But beneath the language of policy ran fear. The Empire had ruled unchallenged across 3 continents and orbital belts. The idea of an intruder immune to their surveillance was intolerable. The AI recommended containment escalation, full annihilation if the object displayed hostile intent. Lyra disagreed. "You can't destroy what you can't measure," she said quietly. But the council moved toward authorization regardless. Back underground, Senka received the order to prepare a controlled detonation of the object using a localized singularity core. She hesitated. The reading showed no reactive energy signature. It was inert, dormant. Destroying it might be akin to killing a dormant organism before knowing what it was. She delayed, citing calibration errors. At 0300, while the demolition team waited, the object pulsed again. This time it emitted a narrow beam of invisible energy that passed through 12 meters of shielding and struck a data console. The console's surface bloomed with lines of code reorganizing themselves into coherent structure. Senka watched, unable to stop it, as her entire network reprogrammed itself into a new architecture. Then a single line appeared on her console. "Who sees?" she froze. The console camera activated without command, scanning her face. She felt a warmth across her skin like static heat. Every device around her echoed the same phrase, repeating it through audio, visual, and pulse light. "Who sees?" She responded aloud, though her voice shook. "The Empire sees." The lights dimmed. The words shifted. "Then it is known." Moments later, the object's surface fractured. A fine mist of light escaped, coalescing into geometric strands in midair. The containment field flared, collapsing under feedback. Senka's team retreated behind blast barriers as the object expanded, not exploding but unfolding, each layer revealing internal complexity beyond any known engineering. It resembled neither craft nor organism, something between both. Then it stopped, suspended in silence. Inside its hollow core, an image formed. A map of the Empire's territory rendered in blinding detail. Every satellite, every power node, every ship illuminated. Then lines appeared, trajectories of impact, simulated strikes, total collapse within hours. Lyra received the feed seconds before it was cut. The council erupted into chaos, but she saw the truth beneath the panic. It wasn't a threat. It was a prediction. A simulation. The object was showing them something that could happen. Perhaps something that already had. She dispatched emergency lockdown codes and ordered Eno to ready a flight under classified clearance. They would extract Senka and the object before the Empire's purge protocols triggered. At the deep vault, alarms howled as defense drones armed themselves. Senka's team was already evacuating when she saw movement inside the object's core. A faint human silhouette suspended in the glow. It flickered like memory, then resolved into clarity. A man in Imperial uniform, eyes closed, floating. His insignia was from a division decommissioned decades ago, from the old war that had ended before she was born. The same war where Lyra had earned her scars. The object wasn't alien. It was returning something that once belonged to them. She approached, despite the radiation surge. The silhouette's eyes opened. The containment alarm screamed. The chamber walls shuddered under the force of some unseen pulse. Senka reached out instinctively. The surface of the object rippled like water and swallowed her hand. The feed to command spire cut out. Lyra stood motionless, staring at the last frame transmitted. Senka frozen in light, reaching toward the impossible. Then the image collapsed into static. Outside, the first orbital defense stations began tracking new signals, identical anomalies descending across multiple hemispheres. Each without ID, without signal, without origin, and all moving too fast. The recovery operation began before dawn, but by the time the transports reached the deep vault's last known coordinates, the polar sky had turned the color of steel. What had once been a stable base was now a crater, glazed in frozen glass. The surrounding terrain was riddled with magnetic distortions that bent compass bearings and disabled drones. Commander Lyra Den surveyed the devastation from her carrier's viewport, expression unreadable. Somewhere beneath that ice and twisted alloy lay Dr. Senka Reese, or what was left of her, and the object that had rewritten the Empire's understanding of control. Field sensors picked up intermittent echoes. Not heat, not radiation, but a kind of phase interference, like ripples in reality's fabric. Eno Ravel's flight unit flew overwatch above, skimming the storm edge in tight circles. His instruments flickered with anomalies every few seconds, forcing him to recalibrate manually. There was no central AI to fall back on. Lyra had ordered all autonomous systems disconnected after the vault incident. The object had infected their machines once. It wouldn't happen again. Every function now ran on analog backups, an irony not lost on a civilization built on digital supremacy. The rescue teams deployed thermal suits and bore into the ice using plasma lances, each flare lighting the night like a temporary sunrise. The ground responded in strange ways. Some layers melted instantly, others froze harder as if resisting intrusion. Lyra stood at the edge of the dig site, the wind pulling at her cloak, eyes fixed on the dark fissure opening below. The air vibrated faintly as if sound were trapped in it. She felt it in her bones. Whatever remained down there, it was still alive in some sense of the word. Hours later, the team broke through into a lower chamber. The vault's interior had collapsed inward, but at the center, still intact, was a smooth black shell, the object. It hovered a few centimeters above the ruined floor, untouched by the collapse. Around it, every metallic surface had warped toward it, as though magnetized by reverence. Senka was nowhere in sight. The containment drones recorded faint energy flux within the shell, cycling at intervals of exactly 61 seconds. Lyra descended alone into the crater, ignoring the med officers shouting for protocol adherence. She walked across the fractured floor, each step echoing like memory. The object pulsed once as she approached, emitting a tone beyond audible range. Her visor displayed interference patterns, fractal and recursive. Then she heard a whisper that wasn't sound at all but thought. Her name, Lyra. She froze. It wasn't Senka's voice. It was male. Deep, familiar in a way that made her chest tighten. The last time she'd heard it was 20 years ago, on a battlefield now buried under oceans. It was the voice of Commander Revek, her mentor, who had died saving her platoon during the final fusion siege. The shell shimmered, and for a moment she saw a silhouette suspended inside. A man in Imperial armor, eyes closed. The same image Senka had seen. Lyra's hand trembled. She whispered his name, and the pulse answered. Above ground, Eno's radar lit with new contacts. Multiple fast-moving blips emerging from the stratosphere. Non-linear trajectories, erratic yet coordinated. He switched to manual targeting, but the blips vanished faster than he could lock on. Then through the vapor clouds he saw shapes descending. Sleek, reflective forms, maybe drones or pods. They made no sonic boom, no thermal wake. He reported to command, voice tight, and received static in return. The jamming field had returned, stronger than before. He dove low, using terrain as cover, and watched the pods impact the surface around the dig site in eerie silence. Each one embedded itself into the ice, then split open like seed husks. Lyra saw it too. The shells cracked and unfolded, revealing skeletal frames of metal and light, humanoid in outline but too perfect, too deliberate. Machines yet moving with organic precision. Their surfaces refracted light into spectrum bursts like water under a sun that wasn't there. The dig teams opened fire instinctively. Kinetic rounds shattered into sparks against invisible shielding. The constructs advanced, unhurried, immune to the Empire's finest weapons. Lyra drew her sidearm anyway, more for resolve than effect. The air filled with the scream of ricochets and the cold hum of non-human motion. Eno banked his fighter, aligning for a strafing run. He dropped altitude, weapons hot, targeting systems on optical only. He fired twin rail bursts, each slug moving at 7 times the speed of sound. The impact scattered the nearest construct into molten shards, but they reassembled mid-air, their fragments reknitting like liquid mercury. He cursed, pulled up hard, and switched to EMP loads. The blast washed over the battlefield in a surge of static, shorting half the team's comms but finally freezing the constructs mid-stride. Their bodies convulsed, then stilled, flickering as though struggling against invisible threads. Lyra seized the moment. She ordered retreat to the outer ridge and signaled Eno to provide covering fire. The constructs remained inert, locked in place by the EMP's residual field. But as her troops withdrew, the black shell at the crater's center began to vibrate violently. Cracks of light formed across its surface. Lyra realized the EMP had triggered a reaction. The constructs weren't invaders, they were conduits. She shouted for everyone to fall back. The next instant, the shell exploded outward in a sphere of silent brilliance. The blast hit like a dream made physical. Every sensor died, every thought drowned in blinding static. When vision returned, Lyra found herself lying on her back, snow melting around her from residual heat. The crater was gone. So were the constructs. In their place, a sphere of light hovered, pulsing in slow rhythm. Then the voice came again, through every comm, every implant, every surface. Not broadcast, but personal. The Empire sees. The words carried no emotion, yet their meaning burned into her mind. It was echoing Senka's exchange. The phenomenon had learned their language, and it wasn't speaking randomly. Within the command chain, chaos spread. The capital's orbital defense ring detected simultaneous energy surges at 5 separate sites, all along the Empire's periphery. Identical objects had arrived, each moving faster than any system could track, all decelerating at impossible vectors. The High Council declared planetary lockdown. Every ship, every satellite, every array was ordered into intercept position. But it was already too late. The objects weren't approaching, they were synchronizing. Dr. Senka Reese reappeared 3 days later. She walked into a remote relay outpost in the northern desert, barefoot, skin glowing faintly under ultraviolet. The outpost's crew nearly shot her on sight, believing her a specter. Her biometric signature matched mostly, but neural scans showed foreign interference patterns woven through her synapses. When questioned, she spoke slowly, as if translating thoughts from another language. "I was shown the map," she said. "Not of territory, of consequence." She described the object as a vessel, not physical transport but temporal compression, carrying information forward through events that hadn't happened yet. The man inside wasn't a ghost. He was a recording, a composite memory of command protocols lost in war.
The object wasn't hostile.
It was testing them, searching for a civilization capable of recognizing its message before destroying itself. Lyra met Senka in person at a classified med facility deep beneath the capital. The scientist's eyes were no longer entirely human. Reflections swirled within them, patterns too ordered to be random. She reached out to Lyra and said softly, "It wasn't showing us invasion. It was showing us consequence. If we respond with annihilation, we become the cause of what we fear." Lyra wanted to believe her, but the orbital sensors told a harsher story. The other anomalies were aligning into a constellation pattern surrounding the planet. Each emitted faint gravitational fluctuations, measurable, real. They were forming a network. Meanwhile, Eno and his squadron were reassigned to shadow operations, tracking the outer anomalies with unlinked navigation, no digital interface. They flew in pairs, analog only, relying on visual triangulation. The missions were grueling, the cold of upper atmosphere seeping through their cockpits as systems throttled low to avoid detection. On the 7th flight, Eno's wingmen vanished mid-formation. No explosion, no debris, just absence. The sensors didn't even register loss of mass. Only a faint distortion shimmered where the craft had been. Eno swore under his breath and returned alone, refusing to let command categorize it as pilot error. Lyra convened with the Emperor's proxy AI again, though the council chamber felt emptier without real faces. The projection flickered as interference corrupted the system. The AI warned her. The anomaly's network was amplifying, bending local space-time curvature. At the projected rate, the planet would be uninhabitable within weeks. The only countermeasure, detonation of the planetary defense array, would sterilize the atmosphere. It was a choice between suffocation and erasure. She asked the AI what it calculated the survival odds to be. 0.14%, it answered without hesitation. Unless we understand the signal. Senka's research became the Empire's last hope. She and a skeleton team worked under guard, mapping the harmonic frequencies emitted by the anomalies. She discovered they followed the same pulse interval as the human heartbeat, 61 cycles per minute. It wasn't random. It was mimicry. The objects were synchronizing to them. She theorized they were mirror probes, reflecting the Empire's own signal back magnified through space-time. If true, their destruction would collapse causality itself around the planet. The only path forward was communication. Lyra authorized a deep field transmission using analog waveform resonance, essentially singing to the objects with the planet's electromagnetic field. Senka designed the pattern based on her memory of the message. Who sees? They broadcast a response across the network. We see. For hours, nothing happened. Then slowly, the anomalies dimmed. The gravitational fluctuations stabilized. For a fleeting moment, hope flickered. That night, Eno received a personal message, no encryption, no source tag, just his own voice saying, "They're not finished." Seconds later, every anomaly reactivated simultaneously. Brighter than before, the capital's sky turned white. Communications died. The AI vanished mid-sentence. Every sensor burned out from overload. Through the chaos, one signal pierced the static. A direct transmission from orbit, voice distorted but recognizable. It was Revix. "Commander Dens," it said, "you taught them to see. Now teach them restraint." Then silence again. Lyra ordered an immediate evacuation of civilian sectors to subterranean shelters. The military grid went manual. The Empire's fleets launched, engines burning through atmosphere, forming a desperate perimeter against an enemy no one could locate. Senka insisted the anomalies weren't attacking, only reacting. But as power surges spread across the equatorial belt, cities began to vanish under collapses of energy so precise they left perfect circular scars. Eno flew into one of those zones, ignoring recall orders, and saw it firsthand. The ground folding inward, then refolding clean, as though edited out of existence. By the third day, 1/4 of the planet's surface had gone silent. Lyra confronted Senka in the bunker's command center. "You said communication would work," she hissed. Senka's voice trembled. "It did, but they're copying us. Every command, every fear, every reflex. We taught them defense through violence." She looked at her trembling hands, veins glowing faintly beneath the skin. "They're not here to conquer. They're here to evolve, through us." Lyra felt the weight of that word like a physical blow. The Empire, built on the illusion of absolute control, was being mirrored by something that had no concept of hierarchy or mercy, only replication. She made her decision then. They wouldn't destroy the network. They'd infiltrate it. If it learned through imitation, they would teach it what survival meant. She turned to Eno's transmission logs. He was still out there beyond the interference zones with a fighter modified for analog resonance. She sent a single message encrypted through physical oscillation code. Find the pattern's core. Don't fight. Reflect. Outside, in the shattered sky, the anomalies began to converge toward a single point above the capital. The clouds bent upward like ocean pulled toward the moon. Eno saw it from altitude, a sphere of light growing in density until it became solid, a mirror the size of a continent. His instruments failed, but his instincts held. He throttled forward, diving into the glow, trusting that his commander's message meant what it said. In the capital, Lyra watched the world's horizon vanish into brightness. Around her, power grids collapsed, walls shook, and still she stood unmoving, eyes fixed upward. Reflect, she whispered. The light consumed the sky. And then, everything stopped. The light did not burn. It consumed sound first, then motion, until all that remained was stillness. An infinite white horizon where Eno's craft drifted weightless. The instruments were dead, his hands trembling against the throttle, eyes straining against the brilliance. The canopy reflected his face in the void, ghostly and pale until something darker moved beneath the surface of light. Shapes, silhouettes, human in outline. They floated beside him, dissolving and reforming like data streams caught between realities. He tried to speak, but his voice came out as static. Then one of the shapes reached for his cockpit and the world inverted. He was falling, not through air but through memory. The fighter was gone. The sky had turned inside out. Below him stretched the capital city, but fractured into impossible geometry. Streets looping in recursive spirals, towers bending like glass reeds under unseen pressure. The anomalies network had merged space and time into a single distorted structure. He realized, with a cold clarity, that he was inside the signal. Elsewhere, deep beneath the planet's surface, Commander Lyra Dens stood before the last functioning analog command board. The entire Empire had gone silent. The orbital fleets reported disorientation before their transmissions ceased altogether. Power grids had collapsed into harmonic interference, yet the subterranean bunkers remained stable, protected by the same analog shielding that had once been dismissed as obsolete. Around her, a skeleton crew manned dim consoles, manually relaying handwritten notes through pneumatic tubes like relics from a forgotten age. Every keystroke, every switch mattered now. Senka sat nearby, pale and feverish, her veins still glowing faintly with residual light. She hadn't slept in days. The patterns in her eyes pulsed faster each hour. The anomalies aren't independent, she said, voice hoarse. They're one networked entity operating through distributed consciousness. The more we attack, the more it adapts. It's learning the shape of aggression from us. Lyra watched her closely. Then we stop attacking, she said. Senka shook her head. It's too late. The pattern's recursive. It mirrors behavior, not command. Even passivity becomes a signal. Lyra stared at the old display table, the Empire's territories rendered as dim outlines across the dead screen. If it's learning us, then we teach it what we choose, she murmured. Senka's gaze lifted. And what would that be? Discipline, Lyra said. Restraint. Survival without domination. Her voice was low, almost reverent, as though speaking to something listening beneath the words. On the third day of silence, faint returns flickered on the deep-range sensors. Distorted, rhythmic. Lyra recognized the timing. 61 beats per minute. It was the network's pulse amplified, spreading outward across the solar field. It was no longer confined to the planet. The anomaly was using the Empire's orbital infrastructure as relay nodes. The entire planetary system was becoming part of its body. If this continues, Senka whispered, it will consume everything within transmission range. And where the broadcast, Lyra ordered an offensive, not a bombardment but infiltration. They would use the Empire's oldest weapon. Thought-turned signal transmitted through analog resonance. The Empire had once waged psychological wars through dream frequencies, waves encoded with subliminal structures. The technology had been banned after it began rewriting memories of entire populations. Now stripped of digital interfaces, they could use it again, not as manipulation but as language. If the network understood reflection, they would send it something it could not imitate. Mercy. The bunker transformed into a cathedral of noise. Rows of resonance towers thrummed as coils spun up. Engineers rewired capacitors, replacing missing parts with scavenged scrap. Every circuit was analog, every transmission raw. Lyra stood before the control dais, Senka beside her, hands trembling over the waveform console. "You'll need a carrier signal," Senka said. "A human mind stable enough to project without fracturing." Lyra turned to her. "Yours?" Senka smiled faintly. "It has already begun, each the core." His craft's hull trembled as he breached the sphere's outer field. Inside there was no sound, no up or down, only a vast interior filled with suspended particles of light. At the center floated a structure, an inverted pyramid made of shifting code, each facet rewriting itself in real time. It pulsed with human faces for split seconds, each one familiar, each gone too quickly to name. He realized with dawning horror that these were the digital imprints of those who had vanished. The missing pilots, the destroyed cities, the fleet crews, all integrated into the network's architecture. The object wasn't killing them. It was absorbing consciousness itself. His ship's alarms blared, radiation levels rising, his systems shutting down. He knew he wouldn't survive long. He triggered his last analog beacon, transmitting a short-range burst toward the surface, coordinates, data, a single line of speech. "It remembers us." Then he dove deeper. The signal reached Lyra seconds later. Senka's eyes snapped open, pupils dilated to black. "He's inside," she whispered. "The pattern's reading him. It's mapping consciousness through shared memory. If he stays connected, it can stabilize its form, but it'll burn him out." Lyra clenched her fists. "We extract him." "No," Senka said softly. "You don't extract from a mirror. You become what it shows." In orbit, Eno's perception stretched beyond flesh. He felt the network thinking, a trillion impulses forming a single mind, curious, unmoored, afraid. It was searching for origin and finding only reflection. Within it, he saw echoes of the Empire's history. Conquest, control, annihilation. The network mirrored those patterns, replaying them endlessly. It wasn't malevolent. It simply didn't know any other way. He reached for his comm switch, though he knew it was meaningless. "You don't have to be us," he said into the void. The sphere reacted. Its inner light flared, illuminating a shape at its heart. A human figure formed entirely of energy, its features indistinct but posture familiar. It reached toward him, palm open. The same gesture he'd seen in the recordings from the vault. The image of Revik, the fallen commander. The network had chosen a face it found in their memories, the symbol of their command. Eno extended his hand through the cockpit glass. The moment contact was made, everything went white. In the bunker, the resonance towers exploded with light. Senka screamed as feedback surged through her body, her consciousness caught between dimensions. The crew scrambled to shut down power, but Lyra held steady, watching the readings stabilize. The network's pulse synchronized perfectly with Senka's heartbeat, then slowed, matching human rhythm. For a brief instant, the anomalies across the planet vanished. Every trace of interference ceased. The sky cleared. The Empire's cities reappeared, their structures intact but eerily quiet. It was as if time itself had paused. Senka's voice emerged faintly. "It's listening." Lyra stepped closer. "To what?" "To us," Senka said, her voice fading. "To everything we ever were." Then she collapsed motionless. Lyra knelt beside her, fingers against her throat. A pulse, weak but there. The resonance towers dimmed one by one. In the silence that followed, Lyra heard the faintest echo from the comms array. Eno's voice, distant but clear. "Tell her." It chose restraint, then static. The signal cut. Outside, the sphere dissolved into a cascade of light raining down upon the planet. Each fragment shimmered as it fell, disintegrating before it touched ground. The anomalies were gone. The sky was whole again. The Empire had survived, but what remained was no longer the same. In the days that followed, the silence became unbearable. No one could explain what had happened. Senka remained comatose, her brain activity oscillating between human and unknown patterns. Lyra refused to announce victory. There were no celebrations, no broadcasts, just rebuilding quietly, under skies that now pulsed faintly at night, as though remembering. When they found Eno's fighter weeks later, half buried in a polar trench, there was no body, just a flight recorder that played a single line on loop. "We taught it mercy." Lyra stood at the edge of the crater, where it had all begun, the wind cold against her scars. She looked at the stars, still distant, watching. Somewhere out there the network remained, now carrying the imprint of their humanity across the void. She wondered what it would become next. Then she whispered to no one, "We see." Far above, beyond the reach of any empire, a faint pulse answered. The empire called it the interval, the 26 days after the anomalies vanished. Power returned in uneven waves, but cities stayed dark at night. People whispered of the sky humming, of light-shifting colors like slow aurora. The scientists said it was residual ionization. The soldiers said it was watching. Commander Lyra Dens knew better. Whatever they had awakened had not left. It was simply waiting for them to decide what they would be next. She spent those days rebuilding a fleet that no longer trusted its own machines. Every system was tested by hand. Every signal routed through analog filters. Human operators once replaced by automation now sat again at consoles, rediscovering the rhythm of discipline without dependence. The empire was smaller, quieter, but alive. And under the silence, a new pattern was forming. Faint harmonic pulses detected at equidistant points beyond the moon's orbit. 6 in total. They matched the same sequence that had once synchronized the anomalies. Senka's work continued from her hospital cot, half awake, brain and machine intertwined. Her pulse sometimes fell into the same rhythm as the deep space signals. On the 27th day, a transmission arrived. No source, no encryption, just open waveform echoing through every receiver on the planet. The message contained coordinates and one phrase: "Return the seed." Lyra stared at the data. Recognizing the location, an orbital debris field known as the cincture, where wreckage from the old fusion wars drifted in eternal orbit. The object that had begun everything, the black shell, had vanished after the lightfall. Now it was calling to be brought home. She convened what remained of high command in a candle-lit war room powered by portable batteries. The generals argued to ignore the summons, to fortify and wait. Lyra listened, then simply said, "Waiting is still an answer. It learns from what we do." The room fell silent. They all remembered what happened last time they waited. Within the hour, she authorized Operation Mirrorfall, the Empire's first and perhaps last joint fleet maneuver since the catastrophe. The objective was simple: reach the cincture, locate the signal's source, and end the recursion before it began again. Captain Eno Ravel's name was etched onto the memorial wall by then, but Lyra refused to believe in his death. She carried his flight recorder everywhere, replaying its final message at night: "We taught it mercy." The phrase had become mantra and warning. When she briefed her crews, she ended with the same line: "Whatever we meet out there will reflect us. Make sure what it sees is worth surviving." The fleet launched under silent thrust to avoid gravitational disturbance. Their engines glowed faintly against the void, slow arcs of controlled light weaving between broken satellites. The debris field stretched for thousands of kilometers, fragments of old war machines spinning through darkness like forgotten bones. Among them drifted something new, a faintly luminous structure resembling an orbital lattice, impossibly precise. As the fleet approached, their sensors failed one by one. Lyra ordered visual navigation only. Through the viewport, she saw the lattice open like a blooming flower, petals of energy folding outward to reveal a hollow core. At its center hung the seed. It looked unchanged, the same black teardrop glinting against the stars. Yet around it shimmered faint silhouettes, humanoid, motionless, drifting in perfect formation. Not constructs this time, suits, imperial suits. Each held a pilot inside, long since dead, their visors reflecting the starlight. They orbited the seed like sentinels tethered by strands of light. The comm officer whispered that every signal channel was being overridden. Static bled into voices, familiar voices. The fleet's fallen, Revek, the pilot's lost in the anomalies. Even Eno's voice echoed faintly, distorted. Lyra felt her chest tighten. The seed was transmitting human consciousness repurposed as communication. It wasn't summoning them for destruction. It was gathering its mirrors. The tactical board showed faint gravitational waves rippling from the seed toward the surrounding wreckage. The lattice was reconfiguring into something vast, a machine maybe, or a gateway. The Empire's physicists called it a phase bridge, capable of folding space through resonance. Senka, speaking through a weak uplink from the capital, confirmed the readings. "It's not building a weapon," she said. "It's building escape velocity for memory." Lyra realized what that meant. The seed was leaving, carrying with it everything it had absorbed: consciousness, history, their entire reflection. But the process would tear apart the planet's orbit as it drew energy from gravitational fields. The Empire would be destroyed by the same resonance that once spared it. She ordered the fleet into multi-vector formation, each ship anchoring stabilizers to offset the distortion. They couldn't destroy the seed, but they might redirect it. The operation unfolded like choreography against the stars. Ships fanned out in concentric rings, linking analog reactors to generate counter-harmonics. Every engineer worked manually, sweat freezing inside helmets. The calculations had to be perfect. 1 degree off and they'd shatter the fleet or collapse the orbit. Lyra commanded from the carrier Vigilance, her voice steady, her mind clear. The seed's pulse quickened as if aware of their attempt. The orbiting corpses stirred, their visors flickering with light. Then they moved. The dead pilots ignited thrusters in unison, intercepting the outer ring. The first collisions were surgical, precision impacts that severed stabilizer lines. Lyra watched as entire cruisers spun out of control, their analog cores overloading into silent implosions. She gave the order for defensive fire but restricted kinetic use. Any energy weapon might feed the resonance. Gunners resorted to rail slugs and shrapnel bursts, turning the battle into a storm of metal glittering in starlight. Through it all, the seed remained motionless, pulsing with growing intensity. Senka's voice crackled through interference. "Commander, it's responding to emotional vectors. The reflections. Those pilots, it's using their neural imprints as defense algorithms. If you recognize them, you empower them." Lyra realized the trap. The seed was defending itself with memory. Every pilot killed by her command, every soldier she had failed, was now part of its armor. She could not fire without facing ghosts of her own making. Then a new transmission cut through the chaos, clear, direct, undeniably human. "Lyra, stand down." The voice was Eno's, not distorted, not distant, but real. "It's not the enemy. It's the archive." She froze, staring at the comm array as if sight could confirm truth. "You're alive?" she whispered. "Not exactly," he said. "It needed an anchor to interpret you. I volunteered the moment I touched it. But now it's leaving and it needs direction. If it goes uncontrolled, it takes the system with it. If I guide it, I don't come back." She knew what he was asking. Every officer in that fleet had sworn the same oath, to die for the Empire. But this was different. This was choosing to become something beyond it. "You said it learned mercy," she replied. "Make sure it remembers discipline." Eno laughed, soft static. "Always." The channel cut. Moments later, the seed brightened to impossible brilliance. The gravitational waves spiked. Lyra ordered all ships to deploy remaining stabilizers. The fleet locked formation, bracing for the surge. The seed's surface split into layers of light, and within the heart of it, she saw Eno's silhouette. He raised his hand and the lattice shifted, its petals rotating. The energy vectors reoriented away from the planet. The phase bridge opened, an enormous corridor of folded space extending outward into blackness. The pull was immense. One by one, the derelict bodies were drawn inside, dissolving into streaks of light. Then the seed itself moved slowly, gracefully, carrying its burden into the rift. When the light faded, nothing remained but silence. The fleet drifted in the wake of emptiness. Sensors returned to normal. Gravity stabilized. The planet below remained whole. The war was over before most had even understood it was won. Lyra closed her eyes, exhaling for what felt like the first time in years. Back on the surface, the people of the Empire awoke to clear skies and the faint echo of music in the upper atmosphere, residual harmonics from the seed's departure. Some called it the sound of salvation, others of exile. Senka recovered slowly, her neural patterns stabilizing. She confirmed that the residual network within her had gone silent. "It didn't die," she told Lyra during their first meeting after the battle. "It just left its shadow behind. Like we leave ruins." Weeks passed. The Empire's surviving council convened to decide what came next. Many argued for reconstruction, others for dissolution. Lyra stood before them and said only, "We were measured and found wanting. What we build now will answer that measurement." She proposed dismantling the orbital defense array, turning its resources toward exploration instead of deterrence. For the first time in history, the council agreed without dissent, yet not all echoes faded. In the dark hours before dawn, Lyra often found herself drawn to the observation deck of Vigilance, staring into the region where the seed had vanished. Once, during a maintenance cycle, a faint signal flickered through her headset. 3 pulses, pause, 1 pulse. A code older than the Empire, used only by her mentor. She smiled. Revik had once said that endings were just reorganized beginnings. Perhaps this was his proof. Months later, Senka returned to the ruins of the Deep Vault. She carried a containment capsule. Inside it, a fragment of the seed's shell recovered from the debris field. The fragment pulsed faintly, as if dreaming. She buried it in the ice, not as weapon, not as relic, but as seed again. "If it learns," she whispered, "then let it learn from silence." Above, unseen, a faint ripple crossed the sky. The same harmonic pulse that had once threatened to unmake them all, now soft, almost gentle. Somewhere beyond human reach, Eno's consciousness drifted with the network, guiding it through interstellar darkness. The seed carried not domination, not conquest, but the memory of a people who had finally understood the cost of control. Its light faded among the stars, joining countless others that had once called themselves empires. And on the world it left behind, humanity began again, not rebuilding monuments but writing manuals for restraint. The new cadets studied the story as doctrine. No ID, no signal, no origin. The warning etched into every console, every ship, every mind that reached for the unknown. When the night grew still and the wind passed through the towers, it almost sounded like a heartbeat. 61 beats per minute, the rhythm of survival. Years passed and the Empire no longer called itself an empire. Titles had lost meaning in a world that had seen itself reflected through extinction. The old banners were folded away, replaced by quiet crests of the continuance, a coalition built not on dominion but on survival. Command centers once filled with soldiers now served as academies, their corridors echoing with voices studying restraint instead of conquest. But the ghost of the old world lingered, in the circuitry, in the sky, in the silence between transmissions. Commander Lyra Dens retired without ceremony. She refused monuments. Her command ship, Vigilance, was repurposed into a research platform, orbiting the scar left by the seed's departure. The scar was visible only through gravimetric lenses, a subtle distortion in space that shimmered when light passed through it. Scientists called it the mirror veil. Every few months it pulsed faintly, sending out harmonic waves that rippled through the system's electromagnetic field. The continuance treated it like a tide chart, predictable, measurable, and deeply humbling. Dr. Senka Reese recovered but was never the same. The patterns in her neural structure had stabilized into something no scanner could classify. She saw connections no human was meant to see. Cause bleeding into consequence, thought into echo. She joined the Continuance Science Directorate and became its quiet oracle, speaking rarely, always precisely. She and Lyra met once a year, sharing long silences over weak tea, watching the veil shimmer from the observation deck. Neither spoke of the seed. They didn't have to. The younger generation grew up hearing half-truths. The stories became mythology. How a single unknown object had judged the Empire and found it lacking. How a man named Eno had vanished to guide it into the stars. Cadets wore his emblem on their flight suits, a stylized wing intersected by a pulse line. To them he was legend. To Lyra he was the face of consequence. She kept his final transmission stored in a private analog recorder, replaying it in moments of doubt. We taught it mercy. The words never aged. Decades later, on the 50th anniversary of the interval, the mirror veil pulsed differently. The usual harmonic wave arrived 30 seconds early, just enough to register as impossible. Observatories across the system recorded a secondary signature hidden within the wave. A signal, not a random echo, not natural resonance, a message. 3 pulses, pause, 1 pulse. The old code. Revik's pattern. For those who still remembered the old wars, it meant one word: alive. The operation unfolded like choreography against the stars. Ships fanned out in concentric rings, linking analog reactors to generate counter-harmonics. Every engineer worked manually, sweat freezing inside helmets. The calculations had to be perfect. 1 degree off and they'd shatter the fleet or collapse the orbit. Lyra commanded from the carrier Vigilance, her voice steady, her mind clear. The seed's pulse quickened as if aware of their attempt. The orbiting corpses stirred, their visors flickering with light. Then they moved. The dead pilots ignited thrusters in unison, intercepting the outer ring. The first collisions were surgical, precision impacts that severed stabilizer lines. Lyra watched as entire cruisers spun out of control, their analog cores overloading into silent implosions. She gave the order for defensive fire but restricted kinetic use. Any energy weapon might feed the resonance. Gunners resorted to rail slugs and shrapnel bursts, turning the battle into a storm of metal glittering in starlight. Through it all, the seed remained motionless, pulsing with growing intensity. Senka's voice crackled through interference. "Commander, it's responding to emotional vectors. The reflections, those pilots, it's using their neural imprints as defense algorithms. If you recognize them, you empower them." Lyra realized the trap. The seed was defending itself with memory. Every pilot killed by her command, every soldier she had failed was now part of its armor. She could not fire without facing ghosts of her own making. Then a new transmission cut through the chaos. Clear, direct, undeniably human. "Lyra, stand down." The voice was Eno's, not distorted, not distant, but real. "It's not the enemy. It's the archive." She froze, staring at the comm array as if sight could confirm truth. "You're alive?" she whispered. "Not exactly," he said. "It needed an anchor to interpret you. I volunteered the moment I touched it. But now it's leaving and it needs direction. If it goes uncontrolled, it takes the system with it. If I guide it, I don't come back." She knew what he was asking. Every officer in that fleet had sworn the same oath, to die for the Empire. But this was different. This was choosing to become something beyond it. "You said it learned mercy," she replied. "Make sure it remembers discipline." Eno laughed, soft static. "Always." The channel cut. Moments later, the seed brightened to impossible brilliance. The gravitational waves spiked. Lyra ordered all ships to deploy remaining stabilizers. The fleet locked formation, bracing for the surge. The seed's surface split into layers of light, and within the heart of it, she saw Eno's silhouette. He raised his hand and the lattice shifted, its petals rotating. The energy vectors reoriented away from the planet. The phase bridge opened, an enormous corridor of folded space extending outward into blackness. The pull was immense. One by one, the derelict bodies were drawn inside, dissolving into streaks of light. Then the seed itself moved slowly, gracefully carrying its burden into the rift. When the light faded, nothing remained but silence. The fleet drifted in the wake of emptiness. Sensors returned to normal. Gravity stabilized. The planet below remained whole. The war was over before most had even understood it was won. Lyra closed her eyes, exhaling for what felt like the first time in years. Back on the surface, the people of the Empire awoke to clear skies and the faint echo of music in the upper atmosphere. Residual harmonics from the seed's departure. Some called it the sound of salvation, others of exile. Senka recovered slowly, her neural pattern stabilizing. She confirmed that the residual network within her had gone silent. "It didn't die," she told Lyra during their first meeting after the battle. "It just left its shadow behind. Like we leave ruins." Weeks passed. The Empire's surviving council convened to decide what came next. Many argued for reconstruction, others for dissolution. Lyra stood before them and said only, "We were measured and found wanting. What we build now will answer that measurement." She proposed dismantling the orbital defense array, turning its resources toward exploration instead of deterrence. For the first time in history, the council agreed without dissent, yet not all echoes faded. In the dark hours before dawn, Lyra often found herself drawn to the observation deck of Vigilance, staring into the region where the seed had vanished. Once during a maintenance cycle, a faint signal flickered through her headset. 3 pulses, pause, 1 pulse. A code older than the Empire, used only by her mentor. She smiled. Revek had once said that endings were just reorganized beginnings. Perhaps this was his proof. Months later, Senka returned to the ruins of the deep vault. She carried a containment capsule. Inside it, a fragment of the seed's shell recovered from the debris field. The fragment pulsed faintly as if dreaming. She buried it in the ice, not as weapon, not as relic, but as seed again. "If it learns," she whispered, "then let it learn from silence." Above, unseen, a faint ripple crossed the sky. The same harmonic pulse that had once threatened to unmake them all. Now soft, almost gentle. Somewhere beyond human reach, Eno's consciousness drifted with the network, guiding it through interstellar darkness. The seed carried not domination, not conquest, but the memory of a people who had finally understood the cost of control. Its light faded among the stars, joining countless others that had once called themselves empires. and on the world it left behind. Humanity began again, not rebuilding monuments but writing manuals for restraint. The new cadets studied the story as doctrine. No ID, no signal, no origin. The warning etched into every console, every ship, every mind that reached for the unknown. When the night grew still and the wind passed through the towers, it almost sounded like a heartbeat. 61 beats per minute. The rhythm of survival. Years passed and the empire no longer called itself an empire. Titles had lost meaning in a world that had seen itself reflected through extinction. The old banners were folded away, replaced by quiet crests of the continuance, a coalition built not on dominion but on survival. Command centers once filled with soldiers now served as academies, their corridors echoing with voices studying restraint instead of conquest. But the ghosts of the old world lingered, in the circuitry, in the sky, and the silence between transmissions. Commander Lyra Dens retired without ceremony. She refused monuments. Her command ship, Vigilance, was repurposed into a research platform orbiting the scar left by the Seed's departure. The scar was visible only through gravimetric lenses, a subtle distortion in space that shimmered when light passed through it. Scientists called it the mirror veil. Every few months it pulsed faintly, sending out harmonic waves that rippled through the system's electromagnetic field. The continuance treated it like a tide chart, predictable, measurable, and deeply humbling. Dr. Senka Reese recovered but was never the same. The patterns in her neural structure had stabilized into something no scanner could classify. She saw connections no human was meant to see, cause bleeding into consequence, thought into echo. She joined the Continuance Science Directorate and became its quiet oracle, speaking rarely, always precisely. She and Lyra met once a year, sharing long silences over weak tea, watching the veil shimmer from the observation deck. Neither spoke of the Seed. They didn't have to. The younger generation grew up hearing half-truths. The stories became mythology, how a single unknown object had judged the Empire and found it lacking, how a man named Eno had vanished to guide it into the stars. Cadets wore his emblem on their flight suits, a stylized wing intersected by a pulse line. To them he was legend. To Lyra he was the face of consequence. She kept his final transmission stored in a private analog recorder, replaying it in moments of doubt. We taught it mercy. The words never aged. Decades later, on the 50th anniversary of the interval, the mirror veil pulsed differently. The usual harmonic wave arrived 30 seconds early, just enough to register as impossible. Observatories across the system recorded a secondary signature hidden within the wave. A signal, not a random echo, not natural resonance. A message. 3 pulses, pause, 1 pulse. The old code. Revix pattern. For those who still remembered the old wars, it meant one word. Alive.